Deboulay, September 12th, 2022, second tape of the day, second video of the day. And on this video, I'm going to speak to you about the role of a case manager. That's what Newberg calls the person who will be building the IEP for your student for the next year, the person who will be maintaining work samples for your child for the yearly review, among many other things that a case manager does. So what is a case manager and why do you want to really get to know this person? So let's give some perspective. Depending on the setting that your child is in, let's say your child is in a 12-1-1 setting. As I've discussed before, what that is, a classroom with not more than 12 students in it, with one teacher and one teaching assistant in that room. So my last job, I was a 12-1-1 teacher for math. There was another 12-1-1 teacher for English, another 12-1-1 teacher for social studies, and another 12-1-1 teacher for science. So your child would rotate 4 different teachers for 4 different content areas. So we are required to teach 5 classes. So 5 times 12 means that each teacher had about 60 kids in that 12-1-1 setting. So those 60 kids need to be managed. Somebody has to take responsibility for the administration of their IEP, for the creation of their IEP, for the editing of their IEP, for let's hope your child never has to have a superintendent's hearing because of behavior that they did. But if they did, someone of one of those 4 need to be present at their hearing and speak for them. So there's, again, a variety of things that a case manager does, but a special education teacher is still a teacher who does planning and everything that a general ed teacher does. So a special ed teacher, no way in a 12-1-1 setting could be case manager for all 60 students. So what happens at the beginning of the year is that those 60 students get divvied up among special education teachers, and we usually end up anywhere between 10 to 15 kids per teacher that we are labeled as case managers for. So that's the 12-1-1 setting. But let's say I'm working in an integrated co-teaching setting. I'm the special ed component. I now have 30 kids in each of 5 classes. So I now have 150 kids. And of those 150 kids, maybe 70 are classified. Again, I can't be case manager to all 70, so it's divvied up. So regardless of what building you're in, or really what setting you're in, you will be assigned to 10 to, if it's ICT, it could be 20 kids. I one time had 20 kids that I was case manager for in a year besides doing all the teaching. So that's how it's divvied up. It's done at the beginning of the year. So right now, all of you parents out there who have kids who have IEPs, regardless of setting, you should be asking, who's the case manager? Who is my child's case manager for this year? And introduce yourself to that case manager. Now, one of the things a case manager has to do, without having the authority to do it, and I'll say it like that, is that the case manager really is there, among other things, to ensure that your child's testing accommodations, program guides are being adhered to. Now, I, as a teacher, have no authority over any other teacher, but I do have relationships with those other teachers to be able to go to that teacher if a problem exists with a child not getting a testing accommodation. And that's where I really want to start. So testing accommodations, as I talked about in the last video, are important to be adhered to because that IEP is a legal document. It has to be followed. So now if you're me as the teacher, right? Let's just pretend you're me. You know that when you give a test, a certain number of students may have time and a half I've had students who have had 2 times the amount of time. So let's say I'm giving a test and it's meant to be a period long, which is 44 minutes. That would mean that that child would get 44 plus 22 or 66 minutes to complete that test if they have time and a half, or they would get 88 minutes. 44 times 2 is 88 to complete that same test that other students without that accommodation do not have. So I ask you, if you're me, the teacher, when are you giving them the extra time? If I give a test today and I know that there are 3 students who still need 22 more minutes or another 44 minutes, I know that I cannot keep them out of my class to do it because then they will miss instruction. And if they miss instruction, they're already set up for failure for the next assessment or this next learning. So, how does a teacher follow that accommodation? So, in the building that I was at about 8 years ago, for a total of maybe 6, 7 years in total, before that, that building created what's called the testing room. And some buildings have this testing room. And so what that means is that if your child took a test second period, your child would grab their lunch from the lunchroom, go to the testing room, and complete that test during their lunch, same day. Or if your child had a study hall, your child would report to that testing room to finish the test that day. But if your child had a test after lunch or after that study hall, that child has to wait till the following day to show up at the testing room during either lunch or study hall to complete that test. Now, what happens in the buildings where there aren't testing rooms? Again, I go back to that original question. Where is the student in my class going to get that extra time? I don't have an answer for you other than share with you what I did in my class. I never gave a 44-minute test, ever, because I knew that in order for me to accommodate double time, the longest my test should take to complete would be 20 minutes. So if I had a unit test, which is large, right? I may take 3 days and plan that into my schedule. So 20 minutes one day, the kids that don't have that extra time stop at 20 minutes and go on to something else that's non-graded. And those kids who need that extra time take it, that period. And then I do the next 20-minute segment. And then I do the next 20-minute segment. So a test that might normally take one day may take 3. That's how I did it. So you as the parent, right, would need to find out, how is every teacher doing that for your kid? If your child has time and a half or 2 times the amount of time, the question you need to ask is, does that building have a testing room? If the building does not have a testing room, then you need to ask each teacher, how is my Johnny getting his extra time? Or my Susie or my Debbie or whoever. How are they getting that extra time? So a case manager, from time to time, if they have a good rapport with their cases, that's what we call them. If I have 17 students that I'm case manager for, I will strive to have excellent, excellent relationships with those 17 so that they can come to me and say, Ms. Boulay, I was in, the tech class and there was a test, but I never got extra time. Or I was in gym and we had to do this and I didn't have my extra time. So whatever it is that hasn't happened, needs to happen in some way. Again, I have no authority over another teacher, but I'm sure that if I can't think of a time when it didn't work, where I would go to that teacher and say, I know you've got like how many IEPs to read through, but in regard to so and so, they need that extra time and didn't get it. The other thing that I would do, and again, this is just me taking it upon myself, a special education teacher in general is never going to have the time to do this unless they're doing it, at like 9 o'clock at night. I chose to do that, but no one has to do that. What I would do is I would make sure I'd go through my 17 kids that I am case manager for. I would tag every teacher on that schedule with, you have, Johnny or Susie or whoever, and they have an IEP. I am their case manager. And I just want to draw your attention to this part of the IEP where it says blah, 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 blah. Again, we're not given time to do that during the day, but you as the parent, right? You have the power and authority to kindly ask who's managing the store, and you could ask that of every single teacher that your child has. So, um, know that we have our individual cases that we're responsible for on a different level, as well as all the other kids with IEPs that we teach. Um, at a hearing, what has to happen if your child did something wrong and they are suspended for 5 days with a soup hearing, that's what it's called. They would be out of school, suspended for 5 days, and then they'd have to appear before um, a hearing officer, and it has to be proven. This is where the case manager comes in. Was the behavior a result of the child's disability? Is the child in the right setting? Is it the setting that caused the behavior to come out, or is it something else? So that's another level in special education that happens that doesn't normally happen with a regular superintendent hearing, and that case manager fills that spot. And helps determine that. So, trying to think, is there anything else I want to add to this? It's really important. Yep, there is one more. Sorry. The annual goals that are on there. I said this in a couple of tapes before, but we need to be clear because to me, this is the huge hole that's in the system here. Huge. That no one addresses. That's my opinion. I'm giving you my opinion now, but I'm going to tell you like it is. If Johnny is in grade 10 and Johnny cannot read, and it's going to be more than Johnny, it's going to be a whole number of kids who are unable to read at grade level, right? And that's going to be listed in the IEP that's a deficit. Then there's a goal in there that Johnny's going to increase his reading levels. I ask you, who is tending to that goal? If your child does not have a resource room, and I talked about that setting, you can't expect the English teacher to teach that because the English teacher has a curriculum, a map, page after page after page, week after week after week, what that teacher has to teach. That teacher is not teaching phonics, sounds, reading. So who's doing it? I said before, no one. No one's doing it. At the middle level, somebody might tell you it's the iReady program with all the bells and whistles that they push, and that's how they learn how to read. What if they can't do math? It's not going to be the math teacher who's teaching who's teaching algebra, which is a Regents course, who's going to explain and take the time away from the curriculum. Got to do this, got to do this, got to do this in this order at this time. They're not going to be teaching what's 4 times 2. They're not going to be doing it. So those annual goals are really important and often overlooked at meetings. Why didn't my child reach their goal? Who taught them? And then if the answer is no one taught them, don't get mad at the teacher. You got to go to the special ed department and say, why did you set this up as a goal that there'd be no time to teach it to my child? This makes no sense. Give my child a resource room. As far as I'm concerned, Deb Boulay, every classified student who has an IEP, who has goals that are not at grade level, somebody's got to be assigned to teach them. what they don't know. Otherwise, you end up with what Newberg has had for years and years and years. Kids who are unable to make it through, who are pulled through in some way, somehow, to get a diploma, but who graduate not knowing basic math, nor knowing how to read or write as an adult. So that's where I'm at. So I'm able to speak to you from the special ed perspective and my years of experience to be able to talk about the deficits, what your child can't do, that they should be able to do, and how that's not addressed. But remember, if your child is not special ed, then the question is the same. If my child is in 10th grade and can't read, is not classified, is not a special ed student, then who's teaching them how to read? All right, you get the gist. You know where I'm going. I know by now you've gotten to know me a little bit. You know what you got to do. Use your voice, parents.